Welcome to Transforming with Drew, where we talk about everything on the TQIA spectrum. Welcome back to Transforming with Drew, where we have our new lovely interviewee, Parker Gunther. How are you doing today, Parker?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Perfect. Parker, would you like to tell everybody a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and what your pronouns are?
Yeah, definitely. So I go by Parker. I use he, him pronouns or they, them pronouns. I use them interchangeably. I'm originally from Los Angeles, but I live in Chicago now. And I work for Discover, the credit card company, as a project manager in our home loans department.
That is awesome. I actually been to Chicago before, and we went and stayed at this woman's house in Plain de Velay, I believe, and changed our lives. Awesome place. I love Chicago. Don't like the parking, but I love
Yeah,
Chicago.
yeah, I love it in the summer anyway.
So, would you want to tell us a little bit more about your transition and how it's been for you so far?
Yeah, definitely. So I transitioned a little bit later. I'm 24, so I guess not that late. But I came out right at the beginning of quarantine, so pretty recently. I was out as queer before that, but that was really when I kind of came into my own and realized it was time to come out. I've known for a lot longer than that, but was pretty convinced that it would affect my career pretty negatively and that I'd kind of struggle to excel career-wise if I was out as trans. So it's something that I hid pretty thoroughly, and to the point where I was like literally in a sorority and had like long blonde hair when I started at my current job. But once quarantine started, it kind of there was no one to pretend, no one was around, so there was no point in pretending to be this like hyper feminine person. And pretty shortly after like kind of starting to be a little bit more comfortable, with who I am and being myself, I realized I had to start coming out, and now I've been out for about a year at work, and about like a year and a half, I guess, with like family and friends and stuff, and it's been great. People have responded a lot more positively than I was expecting. So
That's actually really good to hear, especially when you hear a lot of statistics that tell people that most transgender people, I think it's like over 70% of transgender people make like 15,000 yes a year. So it's really good to hear the other side of the spectrum, knowing that your job is being very understanding. Do you want to talk more about how you feel now in your job, though, and now that you're not in the blonde hair sorority? By the way, I can relate to that. When my wife met me, I had a push-up bra. So I
yeah.
got you.
Uh, yeah, I mean, so they've been great, right? Like I said, that was something I was terrified. I'm sure you were too, but I grew up, and the exact statistic, you just said is something that like I heard as a kid, and was told to me almost as like a, you know, maybe not to scare me directly, but like that's definitely the result it had. Um, and I think in a lot of ways, like I'm kind of lucky because where I ended up, like by complete coincidence, honestly, ended up being so accepting and wonderful. But they've been great. Like, so when I first came out, my team actually got my pronouns and name right quicker than pretty much anybody else in my life, which was pretty awesome. And HR like almost immediately jumped to starting to change like policies and stuff like that, and try to make it a more inclusive workplace. So actually, since I've come out, there's now been I think three trans people who have come out as well in that time.
That is amazing. So it's kind of like you've been a little bit of a catalyst, if you would say.
Well, so I think they were, to clarify, I think they were out before,
Oh,
but they like they hadn't come out, you know, at work. Like they were just kind of using whatever pronouns people assumed, and kind of with that, as opposed to some people who wanted to use they them pronouns who now are able to, because like there's kind of more of an outlet and more of a conversation going on, which I think for the record is more of a factor of the way HR handled it than me coming out. But it's been pretty cool to see.
well, as somebody who actually works in human resources, that's really nice to hear. I actually had kind of an opposite issue before. I had bullying. So, and I was actually kind of ostracized in my last, not my last job, but my last like full-time job, to the point where I remember walking up to the HR and be like, "Hey, I'm having these problems." And my HR person's like, "Well, you should go to therapy." I was like, "Excuse me." And I was like,
Are
"Oh,
you
that's
serious?
brutal." Yeah, it was bad. It was So I remember looking for jobs and I was struggling because at the time I was like, okay, I need people to know that I'm trans. I can't do this anymore. I actually came out older. I'm 10 years older than you, so I came out recently.
Right.
It's just like I can't do this. And then, lo and behold, after stalking several, LinkedIn pages, I ended up finding a really good job. But I found a job with a very queer oriented place, so I feel very lucky in that aspect. But I did have the struggles that you were talking about. I mean, I was working 80 hours a week to make ends meet, so
Yeah.
and just realizing I shouldn't give up on myself. And that's what I think is really important about your story. It's like you finally realize that you do deserve to live your fullest
Yeah.
life and be happy. I mean, you look great. People can't
Thanks.
see. Parker looks great. So, and how is your social life going with this? So your family, how are they accepting of this?
Yeah, so that was also something I was pretty worried about when I came out as queer. I came out as bi a couple years ago. My family struggled a little bit. It was all like very well intentioned struggling. It came from a place of love, but my family's like first generation American and a little bit more traditional in a lot of ways, and so it was a little bit challenging for them to come to terms with that. But surprisingly, it was actually easier for them to come to terms with the fact that I was trans. I don't know if that's a factor of just like how I acted as a kid and like who I've kind of been my whole life, or if it's just like at this point why not, but they were pretty accepting, and my friends like were all super cool about it. Like I had one friend that kind of struggled a little bit, but for the most part, like everybody has been absolutely awesome and super supportive, and everybody I've come out to has like pretty much just been like, okay, great, how can I support you? Like I don't know what this means, but like awesome, I'm here for you. That's great. Which has been like I know I'm super super lucky to have had that experience, but yeah, I've seriously been extremely lucky, and it's funny because I built up this like narrative in my head that you know just became so big, like which again I'm sure a lot of trans people can relate to, but
Yeah.
that I was just convinced like I remember thinking at one point that I had to like I was like, okay, I'm just gonna like go to a different country, I'm gonna like fully transition, I'm gonna come back, and then like no one will know and that'll be fine. And I'll, like, not speak to anyone that I ever spoke to before, and like luckily obviously that's not what I've had to do, so that's been awesome to kind of
That's
all that, you know.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I mean, I can completely understand. I mean, my family struggled. I came out as a lesbian actually, and I put my grandparents through, well, my grandma through hell. She's my grandfather's always been great. I just pick on my poor grandma. But when I came out as trans, it's like your family, it's like, oh, it was easy. And I was like, what? And like I think it to them, it's like it just made sense. They're like,
Yeah,
oh, this makes sense. And that's actually kind of something I wanted to talk about. Like you just brought up a good point. How do you feel? Because you're more early on in your transition, like I am. How is it feeling being from like the queer part to the T part? How is that navigating for you?
yeah,
Especially as you go more masculine as you go further.
yeah. It that's like such a great question, and it's funny because a lot of times when I have these conversations, it's with either like straight people or like for the purpose of straight people, you know. And so I've
Yeah.
never really been asked that question, but like honestly, that's probably the hardest one to answer because there are so many circumstances. Like I'm used to being, like I identified as bi, but like I was used to being like a lesbian. You know, like if I
Yeah.
walked in to a bar, like to a gay bar, right? Like lesbians saw me, right? And like that's kind of like how I
Same.
identified. And it is hard. Like it's kind of a weird not to use the word transition too much, but
But
it
it
is,
is.
right, exactly. Like it's going from having like this one identity to like this being a lot closer to like who I actually am and what I feel more comfortable in. But at the same
Mhm.
time, like the way society sees you is very different, and it sometimes I have to remind myself that's true and that I look different to other people. And that's been interesting. I think I'm still kind of figuring out how to navigate that, and sometimes it feels great and sometimes it feels really awkward. So trying to figure out how to how to make it feel the best possible way as much as possible. But
I know. I actually, I think I can completely relate to that, and it's especially because I'm apparently a very hairy, and my, which is ridiculous, but kind of funny. So it's like walking down the street, you can't like talk to people that you used to talk to, or like I'm a really
yeah,
pet person, so it's like I have to be like very careful about like who I talk to if they have a pet and I want to see their dog. So it's like a whole different spectrum now. And then it's like you kind of miss like being recognized as part of the queer community a little bit, but at the same time you're like actually happy at the same time that you're not being recognized. So it's like what
yeah,
confusion? How does this
that was
compute?
that's a big thing. Like I have talked to some trans guys who like will purposefully like have like pride pins or like trans flags or whatever like everywhere to just kind
Mhm.
of like make it so it's like more known because it is. I mean, it's hard, and I think like femme lesbians and like mass gay men have similar struggles, but like to a certain extent, like it is it's something that's nice, right? Like to have a sense of community and like to feel like you're able to identify other people in your community just by like walking past them and looking at them uh and when you kind of like remove yourself from that, it is a little weird sometimes, but yeah, definitely nice that straight people aren't constantly flagging trans people, so like overall a good thing. But
No, I understand that. My wife is femme presenting, so she would always have issues all the time, and people are just like, "Oh, you didn't know." It's like that's what you're supposed to wear it on your shirt. It's like it makes it a
yeah,
little difficult.
exactly.
And now that I've had top surgery, it's healing, but because of my skin tone, I'll know also have kind of like a visible scar.
Yeah,
Um, and I remember working out recently, and like I kind of purposely like this girl was like a little bit nervous, so it's like I lift up, make sure she can see my scar and stuff like that, like kind of like making it like it's okay. But
yeah,
at the same time, it makes you nervous that you're making somebody nervous and you feel bad, but then you're like, but it's so
yeah,
weird, and it's nice to know that you're like around the same process that I am with everything too, because you can relate to that. I don't
yeah,
know a lot of trans people can relate to that. I know
yeah.
that I think they're thinking about talking like eventually having like this round table of like people who are within the first year of transitioning and talking about this whole entire thing. Like,
Yeah.
what's the whole difference? So, tell me a little bit more about your job, what you love about it, and how did you actually get into this? I'm actually kind of curious about it.
Yeah, yeah. So I went to Indiana University, and I went to the undergrad business school there. And most of the jobs coming out of it were based out of Chicago. So I
Mhm.
started looking at what options I could have. I started out looking pretty exclusively in consulting, and
Okay.
then I kind of had like a last minute like I don't know what I want to do. I'm not sure that that's it. And so I found Discover had a rotational program, which like looked awesome and was awesome.
Mhm.
And so that's how I ended up coming into the company. And my original plan, because I was not planning on living in Chicago, like I said, I'm from LA, so the weather, was a
Huge
big no for
difference.
me. So I was planning on just kind of being in the program for the 2 years, and then when I like graduated the program, as they call it, I was planning on moving to New York or LA. But I've had I mean, like I said, I've had an unbelievably great experience. Like, I mean, even aside from how they handle diversity and like how comfortable I felt like being openly gay and openly trans at the company. Just in terms of like career development, it's been great. Which like I realize isn't the purpose of this, but it's been
It's
awesome. And like
great though.
I think the career development side of it isn't possible unless the like acceptance and like the space to be myself, right? Like I wouldn't be able to focus on my job and like focus on learning and developing if I wasn't able to be myself. And so it's pretty. I don't know. I can't imagine it working anywhere else, to be honest. So
Oh no, I actually think it is a little bit about, talking about this type of stuff is important because you have companies like Wayfair that are very out and they're very proud of taking care of their employees. Spotify is very diverse.
yeah,
Johnson Johnson, like a lot of these companies are they're going with the change because they see what's happening. So then you have all these other places like what we talked about earlier, putting up all these ridiculous rules for transgender people, and it's like this is the worst year in history, I think, for the LGBTQ community when it comes to state legislations. So it's actually good that people know that there are still jobs out there. There are still companies out there that want to help push and pull and kind of make sure that, our community's still there. Just
yeah,
because we're more visible now doesn't mean we never didn't exist before. And that's what people
right.
seem to keep forgetting.
Yeah. And I think
What do you,
like just to tag onto that, like I think the fact that when like HR started updating their policies, all of a sudden there's been like a bunch of people at my company that have been like, oh, actually, now that we're doing this, like, yeah, I use they
yeah.
them pronouns. Like, thanks for asking. And like all of these people who, like some of them were trans, but just like passed, and so they were just kind of stealth and not telling people that they were trans at work, or people who maybe don't pass but were too shy to like say something. Like we've existed
Mhm.
forever, but we're just now like comfortable enough to say something and be ourselves.
Yeah, and then there's like situations even like for me, it's going to be harder for me to change my name because I was not born in the United States, so it's like a little bit more difficult. So
Oof.
like I know I still have the given name. I don't like calling it a dead name because like that name technically helped make me who I am. So like I have my given name that my dad gave me,
Uh-huh.
and I actually chose a name that my mom kind of wanted to give me, and I just made it in masculine form. So there's
Uh-huh.
that. but it's gonna like with that.